In a dawn attack on September 1st, 1939, German forces crossed into Poland. From the beginning, civilians were among those targeted for destruction. It was clear the nature of this conflict would surpass in cruelty anything in the grim history of war. Hitler stated his goals clearly. The aim is not the arrival at a certain line, but the annihilation of living forces. Kill Poles without mercy, all men, women, and children of Polish descent or language. Only in this way can we obtain the living space we need. All Poles will disappear from the world. It is essential that the great German people should consider it as its major task to destroy all Poles. Fighting alone against the greatest military power of the time, Poland was suddenly attacked by the Soviet Union on the east. Against these two mighty dictatorships, the Poles were forced to capitulate on October 5th, 1939. Hitler and Stalin divided the prostrate country between them, and everything we know as human rights was suspended for the people of Poland. In the German-occupied zone, this meant mass arrests, deportations to concentration camps, slavery, and mass executions. Notices listing names of the executed and threats of reprisal for resistance were widely posted. The German occupying forces began segregating the Jewish from the Christian population, ultimately setting up walled-in ghettos where Jews were forced to live in appalling misery. Proclamations of a death sentence for Jews found outside ghetto walls, and for Polish Christians offering any form of assistance, were posted throughout the so-called Aryan areas. Not only individuals, but entire Christian families and sometimes neighbors were summarily executed for helping Jews. Their names were publicized to deter others. In the ghettos, death through starvation, disease, and random murder became common. Then, in 1942, the Germans implemented a frightening new policy: the wholesale deportation of Jews and their extermination in gas chambers. These were the conditions under which Żegota was born.
It was in the summer of 1942 when the first horrible massive liquidations of the Warsaw Ghetto began.
Władysław Bartoszewski, historian, former foreign minister of Poland, and co-founder in 1942 of Żegota.
Over 300,000 people were eventually taken out by the Germans to an unknown destination, which we later learned was the Treblinka death camp. Some people at that time, particularly those who were already involved in helping their Jewish friends, realized that their help was insufficient and that an organized procedure had to be developed.
The idea for this effort came from two women, Zofia Kosak, a conservative Catholic writer, and Wanda Krachelska-Filipowicz, a socialist activist. Together with others in the Polish underground, and with the support of the Polish government in exile in London, they formed a clandestine organization to aid Jews, Żegota.
The name Żegota is actually a code word for the Council for Jewish Help. At that time, it was very often used to indicate any helping activity. I came into contact with several people older than myself, such as Jan Karski and others, who I met through Zofia Kosak in the fall of 1942. These were people who were older than I. Because of my horrible experiences when I myself was a prisoner in Auschwitz, it seemed proper to me to lend my assistance.
In October 1942, the official paper of the Polish underground announced the formation of the Council for Aid to Jews.
Żegota? I know exactly how it began, because at that time, we were in contact with the leaders of the Home Army.
Dr. Marek Edelman, eminent surgeon among the last surviving members of the Jewish ghetto fighting force still living in Poland.
The first actual contact I had with Żegota agents was in the Warsaw ghetto in January 1943. This occurred after the arrival of the first money sent from America. A home army who organized this group, which was the Relief Committee for Jews, who were hiding on the Aryan side.
Among the hiding places on the Aryan side for members of the Jewish underground was this Carmelite convent, where the nuns also stored arms for the underground soldiers. Mrs. Mariana Hochberg, Żegota participant in her early 20s in Kraków, now Miriam Peleg, living in Israel.
How did I find myself associated with Żegota? One of my co-workers, also a young pre-war socialist, told me one day that in Warsaw, an organization was being formed to help Jews. They needed, in addition to Polish activists, at least one representative of the Jewish community to be included in their group. I then met Mr. Dobrowolski, who was the chairman of this council in Kraków, who told me about the operations of this new organization.
Miss Teresa Prekarova, now a historian and herself recognized for her rescue work during the occupation.
Żegota had as its goals social welfare and charitable activities, not military. It was to take care of civilians. Its primary concern was to obtain and distribute money to Jewish people in need. In general, the people escaping from the ghetto were without money, and their survival depended greatly on their receiving monetary help. The delegate's office in Warsaw received these funds from the London-based Polish government in exile through parachutists, the same way that all other Polish underground organizations received their support. Here in Warsaw, a network was formed which distributed this money. These are receipts which were signed by Jewish people who confirmed that they received financial help. They were controlled by two Żegota vice chairmen who checked and signed each page and verified their accuracy. This is how they confirmed payments. These signatures here are those of the representatives of the Bund and Zionist Party. I walked out of the Warsaw ghetto one day in February '43.
Mrs. Helena Kwiatkowska was in her early 30s when she was imprisoned in the ghetto.
My Polish friends were waiting for me. I left unobserved in the middle of a group of Jewish laborers who worked for the Germans on the Aryan side. I had made a secret arrangement with my friends, but unfortunately, shortly after they met me, we were discovered by two blackmailers who obviously wanted money from me. Of course, we did not want to admit to anything, so we continued walking in the direction of my friend's house, where I was to stay temporarily. But they would not leave us. We walked to a pharmacy, but they waited outside for us. So finally, my friends had to pay them off with their own money for 2 or 3 days. This I don't exactly remember. I lived with friends, after which I was moved to another apartment which had been prepared for me. There, for the first time, I realized that I had come into contact with the Żegota organization.
At Żegota's urging, the Polish underground decreed a death sentence on blackmailers and denouncers, and published it along with their names in its newspapers and on posters.
A second very important issue was that of documents. Even for a regular Polish citizen, it was difficult to create forged documents. Where could you get them? You couldn't buy them in a store. One needed to know where and how to obtain them. And besides, some sources made good false documents, others poor ones, only to sell them and make some profit. The Żegota organization, however, had access to the best forgers, Among them were those of the Home Army, which had to prepare documents for their own intelligence workers who operated throughout Germany, using these documents to carry out various undercover operations. These forged documents had to be very good, and they were.
So for Żegota, there was a high level of paperwork activity involving files, records, and documents, aside from monetary help. All of this action was coordinated with the Home Army Legalization Office, which I believe was located on Kapusinska.
While most Polish birth certificates were provided by priests, German documents were forged by underground specialists.
Żegota itself manufactured about 50,000 documents and distributed even more because it also distributed documents prepared by other underground organizations. From my own experience, and from my meetings with people who were helped, and with whom I still have contact today, people who were under my care, I have to say that Żegota might have been their last hope of rescue. They received documents and money, but not only that. More important was the feeling of moral support that they got. The awareness that there existed a group of people who were trying to care for them, that they weren't so alone. Other Żegota efforts were directed at helping the children, placing them in Polish families, where they were brought up as part of the family, or placing them in orphanages, particularly orphanages associated with Catholic monasteries.
The convents directed by Sister Superior Matilda Getter were among the most active, sheltering more than 600 Jewish children. Mrs. Irena Sendlerova, who was crippled in her service to Żegota.
The woman who reported me couldn't stand up to the beatings. She gave them my name. So the Germans learned that I belonged to an organization which helped Jews. The Germans beat me, tortured me, broke my feet and legs, and when they finished this, they condemned me to death. While this was happening, my Żegota colleagues did everything they could to free me, not only to help me personally, but also because I was the only one with coded information regarding 2,500 Jewish children who had been brought by Żegota to various hiding places, in monasteries as well as in private homes. And this file of information was hidden in my home. Thanks to fortunate circumstances, it never got into Nazi hands. My foster mother was a Żegota agent who worked with Mrs. Sendlerova.
Mrs. Elżbieta Ficowska recalls her experiences as a former hidden child.
It was not planned at first that she would become my mother. She was a woman who was a midwife by profession. She worked out of her home on the east side of Warsaw. Thanks to the fact that this home was her property, she could issue birth certificates there, as well as forge papers and register people. I was brought to her when I was 5 months old. I was driven out of the ghetto in the back of a truck, inside a pile of bricks where I was concealed in a small wooden box with air holes. In that box, as a sleeping infant, I was driven to the Aryan side. I was taken to the home of this midwife, my mother-to-be as it turned out, who at that time had prepared a safe home for me with a poor servant woman who lived on the outskirts of Warsaw. My mother took exceptional care of these matters. She discovered that the woman had tuberculosis. She then insisted that I not be turned over to her. After thinking about the situation and the fact that she herself was a widow and that her own children were adults and on their own, she decided that she would be the one to take care of me.
The unfortunate part of this work was the fact that the actual help we provided was only a small drop in an ocean of need. That although hundreds of thousands needed help, realistically only 1 or 2% received it. Furthermore, quite often a Jew or even an entirely Polonized man of Jewish descent, after 3, 8, 10 months or a year of Żegota help, was finally caught on a street by the Gestapo agents and killed. And all that effort was in vain. I myself experienced such things and considered them everyday occurrences. We also encountered people's indifference and unfriendliness. They asked, "Why do it?" And if someone would ask me today, after all these years, how it was possible, I would say that a certain percentage of people in that society, in spite of the terrible conditions we all lived under, were able to risk their own and their families' lives just to be equal to the task of living up to their own ethical and human requirements.
Too little was done. Much more could have been done. But in order to do it, goodwill was needed on both sides. First of all, many Poles wanted to help. They wanted but were afraid to. There is no antidote for fear. Of course, there were some who did not want to help. On the other hand, when we were going to the ghetto to pick up those children, there were terrible scenes happening. One mother wanted a child to leave while her father did not. The grandmother wanted, the mother did not. They were asking what was the guarantee. What kind of a guarantee could I give them? I could not even give them a guarantee that I would get past the sentry. I was escorting the children and infants past the sentry in a very secretive way. Great appreciation should be given to the building caretakers who were located between the ghetto and the Aryan side. Thanks to their courage, I was able to go through. But I always could have come across an anti-Semitic caretaker who could have killed me and the Jewish child too. I could not give a Jewish family any guarantee a child would live. In those cases, very often, I was not given a child, and I was left frustrated and often crying. The next day, when I went back to the building to try again to convince them, it was too late.
At the Warsaw Castle, we spoke with the president of the Academy of Sciences and former Home Army liaison with Żegota, Professor Alexander Geszto.
We had in this in our team some people who played an important role in the Żegota organization. I think about Władysław Bartoszewski, Henryk Woliński, and other people. Some of them died, some of them still are witnesses of this very, very important, morally important. And I think that precisely at this point, it was for us a kind of civic duty, of course, to help and to inform the world about the catastrophe and the approaching catastrophe, and then about the Holocaust.
It was through Żegota that the Polish underground maintained contact with the Jewish underground, and the Poles informed the world about the genocide. Radio transmitters beamed the news to England. Underground publications were microfilmed and brought overland across Europe by couriers such as Jan Nowak, Jerzy Lerski, and Jan Karski. On December 10th, 1942, the Polish government in exile informed the United Nations the persecution of the Jewish minority now in progress in Poland constitutes a separate page of Polish martyrdom. Himmler's order that 1942 be the year of liquidation of at least 50% of Polish Jewry is being carried out with utter ruthlessness and a barbarity never before seen in world history. The messages were brought out from Poland, but they were ignored. The ghettos were destroyed. The trains continued to transport victims to the camps. The outside world did not come to the aid of the Jews.
It could be said that not doing anything good in response to extreme need is already an act of evil. Believing Christians know that we confess to the sin of omission. That means that if you have renounced something, not helping the sick, the dying, or the imperiled, although you did nothing wrong, you are guilty. Viewed in a very subtle yet deeply ethical perspective, the whole of Europe committed the sin of omission. To a higher degree, those who could have done more, and to a smaller degree, those with lesser capabilities. The enormous sin of omission was committed by the governments of the United States and Great Britain, a fact which is today well documented by American, English, Jewish, German, and French scholars. The larger sin of omission was committed by the ones with the greatest resources, the smaller sin by the ones who could do less, but did nothing at all.
Here in Israel, place of refuge for most of the Jewish survivors of the Holocaust, recognition and honor has been given to Żegota as a movement and to individual rescuers. On top of this hill in western Jerusalem is Yad Vashem, a sacred memorial to the 6 million Jewish victims of the Nazi genocide, and as well a place to honor those non-Jews who risked their lives to save Jewish lives. Director of Yad Vashem's Research Center and former member of the Jewish Fighting Organization of the Warsaw Ghetto, Professor Yisrael Gutman.
The important point in the existence and the establishment of Żegota is the fact that it is a rare phenomenon in occupied Europe that such organized form of activity was created. In Poland, the effort to rescue Jews, to save Jews, was much more dangerous, much more difficult than in other occupied countries. And despite the fact there were many people, relatively many people, who do this special yet work in the difficult and the barbaric conditions of occupied Poland. And even if the results are very modest, it is, in my opinion, an expression of great human spirit. And it is a kind of glory for the Polish people, even if it is only an achievement of a very small minority.
Żegota consisted of a few dozen co-workers, plus hundreds of direct liaison persons. These individuals had further contacts, which overall created a new historical standard for such efforts. First, by extending a hand toward the persecuted people in their hour of need. Second, there was the participation of Christians, often practicing Catholics, who, along with atheists, agnostics, socialists, and revolutionaries, created a common movement for human rights, which was a mutual expression of human solidarity. And third, when you speak of history, you learn that you cannot speak in clear black and white terms, rather in many subtle shades. I would like to close my remarks with this statement. The Bible speaks of the destruction of Sodom because not even 10 righteous people were found to save the city. Both Jews and Christians of all denominations are aware of this. In our horrible Sodom, a Sodom which was one of unfettered crime against mankind, genocide, a Sodom which was played out on the corpses of millions, we do find more than 10 righteous people. There are thousands of trees in Yad Vashem, which attest to moral readiness, to one's acceptance of hardship, risk, even death. So, our culture and civilization did not go the way of Sodom, thanks to these righteous people. But I would warn Christians against smugness and self-satisfaction. We cannot say that we did everything that we should have done. He who gave his life, helping his fellow man, can say that he gave everything. But those who lived, including myself, can only say that we did what we were able to do. The living person will never accomplish everything he can. Nevertheless, let it be a lesson that under all such historical conditions, we must act, extend a helping hand, save each other, work together, because on this earth, as it is believed by both Jews and Christians, the greatest value is that of human life.
In September 1995, a memorial was erected in Warsaw to honor Żegota. Those who were part of the organization, as well as those who helped on their own. For the word Żegota came to stand for all secret help to Jews in Poland. Today, school children come here to learn about those whose actions embodied these sacred words. Greater love hath no man than that he lay down his life for a friend. These things I command you, that you love one another. As it has also been said, he who saves one life, it is as if he has saved the world.